Please welcome our next speaker, Annette Brown, a senior implementation consultant. Today, she will be presenting on Management Report Library. What is that? Where is that? Please stick around after Annette's session for a live Q&A.
Hello all, welcome to Dynamics Con. My name is Annette Brown. A little background about me is I have an accounting degree from Michigan State University, and I specialize in financial reporting. I started my career at an insurance company and then decided along the way that being a consultant would be more fun. I wanted to be able to help automate the numbers, and I really didn't want to be responsible for the numbers. I wanted to help you get the numbers. So I've been using Management Reporter for probably about 20 years, and most of those as a consultant. I've done everything from chart design, budgeting, forecasting. I've seen all kinds of financial reporting and the needs to distribute it. So we're going to talk about some of that today. You've probably been to many sessions today, and this might be one of the last ones you're going to. So thanks for sticking with me and being part of this. We really want to thank DynamicCon for putting this on. It's a great way to share information with users, and especially when it's free. We like free. Free is a good thing. So this session is all about the Management Reporter Library. What is that? Where is that? I decided to introduce this topic because it's probably one of the least talked about and underutilized pieces of Management Reporter. One that is the answer to the most consistently asked question about why the Management Reporter database is so large. Most clients, when asked about the library, have no idea this exists and what's happening behind the scenes when they generate reports. In order to optimally use the library, we need to talk about the report groups and securities. We're all about making month-end more efficient as possible, making our processes run smoothly at month-end. So this session is all about options and recommendations on using and maintaining the library. Our main topics of discussion for today are going to be dealing with the Management Reporter Library, how it stores reports and why, report groups, how they work, what you can do with them, security, how do you use it for publishing and reviewing reports. When discussing the library, we also need to understand how to publish reports and distribute the reports contained in it, and how and why we should do maintenance to remove those reports no longer needed or wanted. So let's talk about the library. Most people don't realize that the Management Reporter Library is an integral and unavoidable part of the report viewer. It allows you to organize reports for electronic distribution and navigation. But here's the unavoidable part. All reports, when generated from the designer, get stored in the Management Reporter Library. Every single version. You store reports into folders, or you generate them into folders, very similar to what you can do with Report Designer. But these folders, rather than being stored on a network file share, are housed in the Management Reporter database located on your SQL server. The folder setup is customizable, which allows you to organize these folders into groupings that fit your needs, whether it be by organization, fiscal time frame, or even financial report types. It can also be used as a repository of historical reports. However, a review of how far back you need the comparisons should be discussed, and extra reports removed on a periodic basis to limit the size of the Management Reporter database. Remember, you can always regenerate a report for a prior period if you need it, but it's not necessary to actually store those in the library for years. They can be downloaded to Excel or printed to a PDF and stored on, for archival purposes, maybe on that network file share. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend using the MR library to store years of financial reports. You'll really start to see performance issues if your database starts to get too large. Every time you generate a report, it goes somewhere. That somewhere is the Management Reporter Library, which is housed in the Management Reporter database on the SQL server, like I mentioned earlier. So here we have an example of a structure that I've set up. This system is defaulted with the public folder, which is created during the installation process. This is the only folder that without security setup, everyone has access to view reports and to publish reports. Your administrative user are the only ones with access to everything by default. Other users like designers, generators, and viewers will be needed. You'll have to give them permission to access the other folders, not only to publish reports, but to view them as well. It's worth noting that by default, new reports are set up to go to the root directory of the library. So this is where I end up getting a lot of support calls when people start implementing security roles for their users, where previously they were maybe all set up as administrators, that now those users don't have access to that root directory, and they'll get a permission error when they actually try to start generating reports that are actually going to that root directory. So you'll have to give them permissions to those folders to make that work. So let's talk about versions. The report library stores these versions of your financial reports. Each time it's generated and placed in the same folder, a new copy gets stored on top of the old version. So for example, if you generate the report 5 times, you now have 5 versions of that report in the library, which can be good if you are actually looking to, see the historical for comparison purposes or whatever. But if you're working on formatting or you're correcting, formulation errors or developing reports, and you've generated that report over and over and over again, you now have all of those saved copies in your library as well. So this is going to be where it's very important to actually start organizing and putting things into folders if you decide that you want to actually keep these reports in a repository sort of way. So to see those versions, you would right click on the report, and then you're going to click on show versions. So the most recent version of a given report is displayed, but you can view, rename, move, and delete previous versions as well. This is where I usually talk about maintenance on the library. Since there's no process in Management Reporter that deletes or replaces reports automatically on generation, we need to set something up to remove the unwanted reports. You can manually delete the reports from the front end, or you can set up a SQL job to automate the process. If you're going to automate the process, then you are definitely going to need to decide what the structure of the library is going to look like, how many months of history do we need to maintain for comparison, and how to remove preliminary reports. You may decide you are just going to export them to Excel or print to a PDF, and the need for the historical versions in the library are null. Or you may decide that you need 6 months of history and 1 version of each report that were placed in monthly buckets. In either case, we'd want to set up a SQL job that uses some scripts from Microsoft and runs on a periodic basis that will remove all the reports that don't meet or that do actually meet the criteria of being removed. So let's talk about report groups. In a nutshell, report groups are used to generate multiple reports at the same time and put them in the Management Reporter library or folders as needed. So depending on where you want to put things, you can use the report groups to help you with that. Being able to define where reports get distributed at the report group level cuts down on the steps needed to deliver reports out to users in a company. So this is where some efficiencies can actually be gained, right? You can put the same report in different report groups. Just remember that, if you generate those report groups, you now have increased the number of versions of that particular report in the library. But depending on how you need to lay out the security, that might not be a bad idea, and it might actually be necessary. So setting up a report group, essentially you're going to click on the panel down in the bottom left corner, and you'll notice the new button, and when you click on it, it's going to actually open up a new report group. That new button in the corner will actually change depending on the panel that you click on the bottom right. So when you click on report groups, the default for the new button will actually be for report group. So from there, you just click the add button, and you can select multiple reports by using the control key or the shift key, just like you can do in Excel, and then hit the add button. And what that's going to allow you to do then is to generate all those reports at the same time. From the report group, you can override the individual report settings and make the entire group of reports generate with the same criteria. Or you can actually click the override button and things like the company, the detail level, the date level, the date, the period, you can actually override the individual reports and make all the reports in that report group generate with the same criteria. This can be good and bad depending on what you need to do. If you decide not to override those because maybe you need the balance sheet to run down to a detail level, or actually probably more of an income statement run down to a detail level, and maybe the balance sheet only needs to stay at a financial level, you may not want to check that button. But as soon as you deselect that override button, you lose the ability to change your date. So at that point, you'd want to check the default base period on each of the individual dates just to make sure that everybody is set at the same setting, whether that be S-1 or the system, or everything's set at current, so that they all match, so that you don't end up with one report that gives you July and one report that gives you January. Okay. It's also important to know that if a report in the report group uses a tree, then the company, in that tree, you're actually defining the company, then the company ID that's in the report group will get overwritten. It will get ignored, essentially, for that particular report. So if each of the reports use a company tree, because like say you're doing consolidated reporting or whatever, then the company name that's in the report group will actually get ignored. So that's just a nice way of being able to still choose multiple companies at a time as long as you're using a tree. So there are a couple different places to define where you want the report to be published in the library, depending on how you're generating the report. So if you're just doing an individual report, you can look at the Output and Distribution tab and choose the library folder that you want that individual report to go to. When running a report group, the Group Distribution tab defines where the group landing page is actually going to be placed in the library. If you decide that you want the reports to go to a particular location, you can click on the report distribution, and you have three options here. The reports, when published to the same folder, you can override. So if you override the report location folder, it's going to ignore the individual reports, and you can tell it to go wherever the group distribution was going to go. If you deselect that over the report generation, you can have all the reports that are in the report group go to a specific folder. So for example, let's say you want the reports to go to the January folder, and then the next month you want them to go to the February folder. You can, instead of having go to each individual report, you can make the report group put all the reports in a specific folder. And that's where you would do that on this report distribution or group distribution tab. If you have any questions about that, put that in the chat memo, and we can kind of go through that at the end. The next thing I want to talk about is part of distribution is being able to schedule reports on a periodic basis. That can be an individual report or a report group. This works very similar to like setting up a recurring meeting in Outlook. While there's no automatic email generation process, you can publish links to a network file share. So that's what you're seeing on the right-hand side. So the left side of the screen is where you can actually set up scheduling of reports. On the right side of the screen is where, when you're setting up a report, if you wanted to, you could actually publish a link into a network file share so that your users would just go to a network file share, click on it, and would open your report in a web browser. I don't really have a whole lot of people that use either of these two functions, but I like to throw it out there just because, some people find it useful. I know of at least one company that I work with. They have many schedules actually set up because they run, 50 to 75 reports at a time, and they like to be able to have those run overnight. So they set up a SQL job or a schedule here to let them actually do that. Most people Though I find once they set up a report group, don't really need to schedule reports as long as they can run the report group on demand and have it generate everything. Because, it's not very often that you can say, oh, yeah, I want to be able to run reports on the third Thursday of every month. It's probably more likely that when you're ready to run reports, you may like to be able to kick off a report group and just generate all the reports that you need for month end at that time. So let's talk security. Now that you've seen the library and the reporting groups, how do I let my users in and limit what they can actually see? Well, security is handled with Active Directory, which is different than the way Microsoft Dynamics actually handles security. In order to actually get into Management Reporter, you have to be set up in Active Directory. It uses users who are logged into the box to launch the application. So whoever you're logged in as on the box, that's what's going to launch Management Reporter on. If you email a link to a report for your users to open a web browser, it's going to open them as whoever they're logged into on the box. Okay. Since they need to be a member of the Active Directory in order to see them when you open them in WebViewer. That's why part of why it uses Active Directory. So when you launch Management Reporter as the designer, depending on which data provider you're using will actually determine if you really even need GP credentials. If you're using the legacy data provider, then you would need GP credentials in order to be able to generate reports. But if you're using the data mart, then your users that are running Management Reporter don't need to have GP credentials just to generate a report. It is important to note that there's no licensing requirements for Management Reporter, meaning you can set up as many users with whatever role is needed. And again, that's different than the way GP handles it. GP, you can set up as many users as you want, but it only lets so many people in depending on how many licenses you have. Where Management Reporter, if you need to set up 75 users, 100 users, whatever, they can all get in and start using and working with Management Reporter, opening reports, generating reports, all at the same time. And if you need to set up 25 of those 50 users as administrators, you're not limited in being able to do that. In CU16, they did have the ability to use TTPS, which would allow you to not be connected to a VPN, but still be able to view the reports and have that encryption between the MR server and client. So if you're interested in that, you could talk to your VAR about how to get that HTTP piece involved to allow people that are not necessarily connected to the network at the time, but have a network user ID to be able to open a report. So obviously, if you're going to use security, you need to set up users. Many of the things I talked about today require security. So we're going to talk about the best way to kind of manage that. So the first thing we need to do is, well, how do you set up a user? So again, when you click on the panel, on the bottom left-hand side, you're going to click on the security panel, and you'll notice that the new button now changes to a user. Looks like a little person. And when you click on that, it's going to open up the new user screen. From there, you just click on the search, and then you're going to type in their name. Now you can put in partial, whatever. It'll do a search, and then you just choose who you actually want to add as a new user. As and you're going to be searching through the Active Directory. Okay. Obviously, you need to be an administrator to be able to do this. And that's one of the differences between the various different roles. So once you've chosen your user, you're actually going to give them a role. There are 4 that are available. You have administrator, who's allowed full access to all tasks in the designer. You have a designer user who can design. They can generate, edit, view reports and report building blocks, and they can schedule the reports. So they probably have they do have the most functionality other than an administrator. The only difference between an administrator and a designer might be that the designer can't do anything dealing with security, but they do have to be given permissions to different folders and things like that in companies, where the administrator by default would have rights to everything. As a generator, you can generate reports and modify the parameters for the reports, but you can't change the reports. You can't design them in any way. And a viewer would not even be able to get into designer in the first place. You'd use that role for anybody that just needed to look at the reports that have already been generated by somebody else. Setting up groups. So you can set up groups in Management Reporter, and then there's security groups. So they would be very similar to like what you would be doing in Active Directory. So like you might have an accounting group on the Active Directory. If you put a new user in that, they get rights to anything that that group has rights to. So groups are a helpful thing with Management Reporter as well, and you can set up groups. In order to be able to set up a group, again, you would want to click on the security tab. And now instead of just clicking the new button, you're going to click on the drop down for the new button so that you can actually click on group. So now the dialog box that comes up is actually going to be the group dialog box. You can give it whatever name you want. And when you click on the add button, you're going to see a list of users there, and you can add users to that group. So you'll want to think about what kind of groups you want to set up here. They can be set up based on the kind of role. So if you've got multiple companies and you've got a bunch of designers, but only certain users need to be able to access certain companies, that's going to be the next screen, is being able to, if you decide to set up groups based on roles, designers or generators, you'll need to limit which companies a user can generate reports for. You can assign companies on the company access screen here. Note, roles that can generate reports, so designers and generated roles, must be given rights to companies either through groups or individually in order to generate those reports. Viewer roles do not need to have access to companies in any way. They only need to be given rights to folders in the library. Access to companies is only needed for roles that can actually generate reports. So now that we've talked about how to set up your user groups, we're going to talk about, well, how do you apply it then in Management Reporter? Where does that get associated? So we talked about user roles and being able to access the application in general. The report library. So once you've set up your users, you set up your groups, you're going to need to go into the library, and actually you'll have to have decided what you want your structure to look like, but you're going to then need to be able to give them permissions to those folders. So just like on a network file share, you have to be given rights to those folders, otherwise you won't be able to see them. So if reports are published to those folders, then your users may not necessarily be able to see them unless you're using trees and you add security in the trees. So we're going to talk about tree security next. And here on the screen, you're seeing that you do have the ability to use tree security. So let's say you have a departmental tree, for example. You can personalize and the secured view of your data. So if you've got only certain managers that should see certain departments, we can still publish one version of the report, but then when you send that link to your users to be able to look at the report, they're only able to open those pieces that you give them rights to. So in order to be able to do that, if you had, let's say, a tree like this where it was just departmental, you would click on the branch, and then you would click on the unit security, and it's going to pop up this unit security dialog box, and you can actually click on the user and either by group or by individual, assign people to the individual branches. Again, this is kind of where I like to use groups. So even if it's a one-to-one relationship, let's say you set up departmental groups and it's still just one user in the group. It's like groups in Active Directory, right? You'd rather assign security to a group so that if you add new users or if you've got to replace people out in certain departments, you put them in the group, and then wherever that group has rights, that user will now have rights rather than you having to go every place within the environment, libraries, trees, whatever, and adding that individual user. Now that we've talked about the MR library and where the reports go, when you generate them, I wanted to show you the web viewer and show you what it looks like when you open them. So this is an example of the landing page if you were to create a report group. So my report group had 3 reports, and when you generate that report group, it's going to open in a web page. Even if you've got your default viewer set up to go to the report viewer, whenever you use a report group, it is going to open in the web view. There's no way around that. I get questions about that all the time, but this is what it's going to look like. And each of these links, each of these green boxes, is a link back to your report. You can right click on the link and you can open the link in either a new tab or a new window, or if you just click on the link, it will actually open the report within that window. One of the benefits of using the report group is to generate reports. To generate reports is the ability to download all of those reports into a single Excel workbook. So to do that, you just click the download button that you see there, and then you click the Excel option. And when it exports it to Excel, you'll notice that every tab is now a different report. So it takes all the reports in that single report group and it's going to export them all to a single workbook. That can be really handy when you're trying to create a monthly packet that you have to actually hand out to your users. You can also print the report groups. So, I get questions all the time about, well, how do I print all these reports at the same time? Well, one of the options might be to actually run the report group. And again, when you click the download button, you can then choose the XPS option. I don't have a ton of people that actually do this, just because the XPS, it doesn't remember your formatting. It doesn't make them as pretty as if you were to try, if you were trying to make board presentation quality reports or whatever. I would probably still export them all to Excel and then just print the entire Excel workbook, because at that point it's going to remember what your margins are and if it's supposed to be landscape and portrait and all that kind of stuff. So this is just a quick reference of the web viewer. So over in the bottom left corner, if you ran this with a tree, that's how you're going to be able to click on the different pieces of the tree. You've got an option for rerunning your reports with a report option. And I'm going to show you these in more detail, but I'm just kind of going across the page so you can actually see what these are. The ability to jump to different pieces within your report. If you had charts and comments or footers and you wanted to see summary, you'd be able to use the show button. You can always also use the show button to see the previous versions of reports. So that, again, that's going to be important to clean up your library so that your users are only seeing final versions for reports. You can print individual reports to an XPS or to a regular printer. And then you've got the download option to either export to Excel, or on an individual report basis, you can have that report open in the desktop viewer instead of the web viewer. So the report option, if you click this option here, will allow you to actually generate this report for a different time frame. So let's say you ran the report for December and you wanted to see November's version. You could click on the report option, change this, and then it would regenerate this report. Now, whenever you do anything like this in the web viewer, so remember how I said every report goes to the library? When you do it in the web viewer like this, it does not publish this to the library. This stays in cache, and as soon as you exit out of this screen, you wouldn't have access to that version of the report any longer. You can view reports side by side. So let's say you have the summarized version on the left side, and then you wanted to see the detailed version of that report on the right side. You can do a right click and open them in different tabs, and then you can use the snap feature in Windows to actually, have those snap to each side of the screen, and you can actually view those reports side by side. So that can be really handy when you're trying to compare things. Or maybe you have two different versions for different months, and you want to be able to see this month versus last month's version of the reports. You can use the go-to option at the bottom to allow you to jump to different version or, quick links in the screen. So it essentially looks at the calculated or the description rows to jump to the report. Now, if your report's only one page long, that's not going to be very impressive. But if you've got a report that's like maybe 5 or 6 pages long, it allows you to kind of jump through that report a little bit more quickly. You got the show menu. which allows you to maybe see the summary lines of a report. So what this is going to do, it's again going to use those description lines and your calculated lines, and it's going to show you a summarized view of that report that might have been a little bit more detailed. You can print from the web viewer. Again, I kind of mentioned that a little earlier, that on an individual report, you can actually print individual reports. This was improved from earlier versions of Management Reporter, where when you printed it, it kind of looked like just a web page. And now you get the option of being able to choose the financial level that you want to print, whether financial account, transactional, and you can actually choose the format, the page layout, if it needs to be portrait or landscaped. So you can choose those, and you can reset your margins. Unfortunately, it doesn't remember what your page margins and setup were from the report definition. So if you've already got that predefined, when you print from the web viewer, it doesn't remember those kinds of things. You have to reset that up. So I usually tell people, if you need to print a board presentation quality report, then you may want to do that actually from the desktop viewer and not necessarily the web viewer. But if you just need to print a quick copy of it and you need the entire report, this version will actually let you do that. So the next thing that I really find helpful is being able to drill down to the account level and then being able to drill back into your ERP package, whether that be GP, if you're on D365, whatever. This functionality works on both of those. So once you get down to the account level, if you drill onto it, now this does require that you actually have GP open already. And if you're running a single company, you need to be logged into that company. So if you've got multiple companies, whatever company you're running the report for, whatever company you're trying to drill into, you have to have that company open in GP. So if you're doing a consolidated report, you might have to do a little flipping back and forth if you want to use this functionality. But when you double click on the account level, it will actually open the detail inquiry screen and fill in the information for you. So it'll fill in the account and whatever the column type is, whether it be an actual column or a budget column, it will either open the detail inquiry screen or will open the budget maintenance screen. And based on the date range that's in that column, it will actually fill that in as well. So if you ran a month of, it will list just the month of column there. If you ran a year to date, it will fill the dates in for the entire year. So now you're in GP, you're in that detail inquiry screen. This gives you the ability to click on a journal entry and follow it all the way back to the source document. So this can be really handy when you're actually running, like say you're doing a rolling 12 or something along those lines, and you've got a list of all of the expense accounts going across, and all of a sudden you see this spike in a particular month. You can click on the link and drill back to GP and actually open that month and look at all of the transactions without actually having to run the report down to a transaction level. I use this all the time for troubleshooting, and when I show it to people, they get really pretty excited about being able to do that. So it's a good function to have, and if you're not using that, try it out. This works both in the web viewer and in the desktop viewer, being able to do that. You just have to make sure that you have GP open already in order for that to work. Well, I've gotten to the end of my presentation. Congratulations, you made it. Woohoo! I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope you found this session informative. Next, we're going to open it up for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, then let's get them answered. Thanks, guys.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there. All right. It looks like we have a couple questions here, Annette. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. So this one is from Roger. He says, I may have missed it, but can you drive reports into the library based on the period you are reporting in?
Absolutely. There's a couple different places that you can actually do that. If you're using the report group, there's the report group and the group distribution or the report distribution will allow you to change what folder you actually want to send those reports to. So you don't have to go back to individual reports and select that you want all those individual reports to actually go to a different folder. When you generate the report, you would just want to check those tabs and choose the folder at the time that you actually generate it.
All
So
right.
yes, good question. Thanks, Roger. That is
Great.
definitely something that I actually recommend as one of the benefits of using the report group. And if you are going to use the library, because it would be very, very tedious to have to go to each individual report and change that. So yeah, using the report group to do that is definitely a time saver at month end. And I think I saw one about somebody was asking about the library viewer or the web viewer, and they said thoughts. And I wasn't sure if they were asking, which do I prefer, using one or the other. And I usually, in that regard, I usually tell people that it I personally like the report viewer better just because it has a little bit more functionality for the account, but it depends on what you're trying to do. Because there's pros and cons to using both. There's some things that the report writer will do that the web viewer doesn't do, and vice versa. So, like in the web viewer, you can refresh a report without having to regenerate it, and then it doesn't go to the library unless you publish it. So that can be nice if you're working on month end and you're putting journal entries in and you want to see how the report is going to look based on that journal entry that you're putting in. You can rerun a report for a different time frame. So let's say you're not maintaining the library, but your user wants to be able to see, well, what did last month look like? They could change the report date and be able to rerun the report without having to go into the designer to do that. Printing or exporting to Excel, you have a little bit more functionality, more control over things if you're actually doing that in the report viewer rather than the web viewer. So within the web viewer, when you export to Excel, however you generated the report is what you're going to actually get in Excel. So if you said, I wanted to go down to a transaction level, and you ran it for the entire tree, when you export it, you would get all of that. If you were in the report viewer and you were exporting to Excel, you can choose how much of the tree you want to export. So if you only needed the summary levels, you can choose if you want the account levels and the transaction levels. And if you didn't want any of that, you could choose not to do that. So even though you may have run a report down to a transaction level, if you wanted to be able to send the bank maybe just the financial level, you don't have to rerun the report to export it to Excel. You can actually choose that functionality from the report viewer. So hopefully that answered your question. If that's what you were asking about the differences between the two.
Yeah, he did follow up. So does that go for viewing financials?
For viewing financials?
Which would you
Oh,
prefer?
advantages and disadvantages for using the tool, using financials. Yes, exactly. And then being able to drill back to GP, you can do that from either one, whether you're in the report viewer or in the web viewer. You can drill back to GP from either of those. So that part's not, a pro and con because you can do it from both.
Great. Looks like we have a question from Martin. Can you comment on management reporter versus jet reports? Advantages and disadvantages?
Just on a high level, I mean, I know enough about jet reports to be dangerous, but not to be an expert by any means. The thing that I like about management reporter is it truly is designed for the accountant. It's got the accountant in mind. As far as it may only report on the general ledger information, but you don't have to know table structures. And most accountants don't know table structures. They know their chart of accounts and they know the things that go in those accounts, and they know what they want to go on each row, but they wouldn't know how to create a SQL statement. And in Jet Reports, there are some canned things to be able to connect to things. And I like the fact that in Jet Reports, you can actually report on any module. So from that regard, that's really nice that you would be able to do that. Management Reporter is a niche. It has, only allows you to do the general ledger stuff, but what it does and what you can do with it is very powerful. So in that regard, they both have their pros and cons for sure. One of the very big pros of Management Reporter is it comes with your system already, and you don't have to pay an extra software fee to be able to use it.
Thanks, Annette. We have a question from Heidi. For report cleanup via SQL script, what are the parameters that can be used?
There's actually 2 scripts that come from Microsoft. One is that it'll just look at the create date and delete anything that's beyond the create date. The other is if you are using folders, you can put the create date and a number of versions per folder. So let's say you set up a year folder, and under the year you put 2020, and then under 2020 you put the monthly buckets. When you run the script, you could say, I want to make sure that I keep one version in every folder. So it would allow you to be able to, still clear everything up, but still maintain at least one version per folder. So hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Annette. Have a question here. If we're unable to see some of the features you demonstrated, i.e. report options, drill down, and we're on the most recent version, is there something else that we're missing?
Being able to drill down, you need to make sure that when you generate the report, so when you're looking at the report definition, you need to change the report definition to run at least to an account or a transaction level. In order to be able to drill back to GP, you have to drill down, you have to run the report to an account level. Once you're on the account level, that's when you can then drill back to GP. So if you're running the report only to a financial level, you would never be able to get back to GP. Good questions. Keep them coming.
I know. There's another one here. Annette, are you aware of any future developments of Management Reporter?
Well, it depends on which ERP that you are on. The GP track, it's in maintenance mode as far as I know right now, which means they're supporting it, and it's going to be released with GP and be supported as long as GP is supported, but they're not really developing it. For D365, it is in development mode. So that's what I've been being told from Microsoft, is that it is being developed. So I'm kind of hoping that somewhere along the line, they may decide that, account schedules really aren't really all that good in BC, and that they implement Management Reporter as a reporting tool in BC. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. Maybe we need to start knocking on some doors to say, hey, we need something that better that comes with the software that allows us to write financials in a more flexible kind of manner than account schedules.
Thanks, Annette. We have a question from Dwayne. If we do not ever refer to old versions of reports, can we just delete the report from the report viewer to reduce the size of our Management Reporter library SQL database?
And I would highly, highly, highly recommend that, because the larger the volume of your library, the slower it's going to be for your reports to actually start opening. Some clients may never experience this because they don't have that many, but I was just working with a client that they had a 3 terabyte Management Reporter database, and it was taking so long for them to do anything, and they started getting locks even when trying to generate reports. It took many, many, many hours to clear out all that history, but once they did that, the reports started generating faster and working. So if you're not going to use the library at all, you don't need any, you're going to just regenerate reports if you need to look at something then what I would do is probably just set up a SQL job using the scripts from Microsoft that just remove all the history and just not keep it at all. But you can go into the library and manually just select the reports and hit delete. It will then ask you if you want to delete the current version or all the versions. And if you're going to do that, kind of be wary that you don't select too many at a time, because remember the versioning that's there, you may be deleting not one report, but 50 versions of that report if you've been running since 2014 and have never deleted anything out of your library.
Thanks, Annette. Sean says he's falling out of his chair at that many terabytes.
I was falling out of my chair too when they called, because I had warned them before they started, because they have like over 350 entities. And they were running somewhere like around, it was somewhere between 10 and 15 reports per entity. And they were not using, that's not using the trees. That was each company had that many. So they were running well over 3,500, even if they only ran it once, and they were running them daily, like 7 days in a row, all of those reports. So they just had, oh my gosh, they had so many reports in their library. It was painful.
And he also asked a question here. Are there controls that can be part of the report preventing drill down?
Absolutely. Yeah, I get that question all the time. So let's say you ran an income statement and you've got salary information in there and you don't want anybody to be able to see the salary information. You can make the rest of the report drillable, but you could actually go on into an individual row and mark that row as either it's under print controls, and one of them is XD and one of them is I'm trying to think of what the other one is, but one allows you to, like, you can't go down to the account level or you can't go down to the transaction level. So let's say that line made up 4 accounts and you're okay with them seeing the account balance, but you don't want them to be able to drill in and see the transactions for any individual account. You can leave it so that the whole report is transactional, but that one line you can only get to the account level and you can't. So you can do it both ways. Yes. Good questions. Keep them coming.
We have one here from Bill. Oh, could you provide the scripts you noted at the beginning regarding the removal of old data?
They are from Microsoft, so they are definitely available. I think if you were in either customer source, I would think that would probably be a better source to get them. I have them obviously, but yes, you definitely can get them off of like customer source, or if you do the knowledge there, you can definitely get them from there as well. But if you're having problems, we'll put my contact information in there, and you can definitely reach out and we can talk about it. Yes.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions here. We can give it a minute. Annette, could you provide your email too on audio, and then I'll enter into the chat?
Yep, it's ABR, so Annette Brown, so ABR at columbusglobal.com. Sean is falling over. That's funny. Yes, there's 2 actually codes for disabling drill down. One is XD and the other one, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but one does the account level and one does the transaction level.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of questions here. Thanks so much, Annette. Great presentation.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that I was able to do this. It's definitely something that I see all the time with libraries not being cleaned up, that, you know, nobody ever really told you about it. And so, you know, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. Oh, I see one more question just came in. What is your opinion on the data mart versus legacy? My company is considering abandoning data mart and reverting to legacy. There are some things that you can do with the data mart data provider that you can't do with the legacy data provider. One of them was the option of, when you're in the report viewer, being able to click on the report options and regenerating that report for a different time frame. If you're using legacy, you wouldn't have that option. Some of the other things are when you're doing a transactional level report and you put the ATTR columns in your column definition and you're choosing the attributes from your journal entry that you want to include on the various columns, you will see more options with the data mart than you will with the legacy. The other things that I see the difference between the data mart and the legacy is depending on how many companies, if you're doing consolidated reporting or if you're just doing individual companies. That one company I was telling you about that had the 3 terabyte database, they had to use the data mart because when they were trying to run their reports, they were not using analytical accounting. It was straight up GP. When they ran the reports, they would go 4 minutes with the data mart, but if they ran it with legacy, the reports were taking 4 hours to generate. So, you know, the data mart indexes the information the way management reporter wants to see it versus when you connect with legacy, it's going directly to the tables. And there are pros and cons because, you know, there is a slight time lag. But those integrations run, for the good or bad, run every minute to every 5 minutes, keeping that data mart in sync with what's being posted in the general ledger. So the transaction one runs every minute. So when you post something in GP, you need to wait at least a minute for it to go over into the data mart, but then you would actually see it. Some of the other things like adding new companies, that runs every 5 minutes. So like I said, that's for the good and bad because it does create a ton of chatter on your SQL server. And yeah, SQL admins really don't like that. But, you know, sometimes you know, for a report that takes 4 hours is just not, it's not productive. It doesn't work. So my suggestion on that would then be, you know, you can have them both installed at the same time and create reports that have the legacy and the data mart, run them both and see, do you see any performance issues when you run it either way? Does it take less time to run it with a data mart? Does it, you know, versus legacy? If you're not seeing any of those things and you don't need to do the report options, whatever, then, you know, it may be a good option just to go back to legacy and not have to worry about making sure that that data mart is maintained.
All right. Thanks again, Annette. And thanks everyone for your time today.
Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for joining. This was a lot of fun. If you need anything, you know, definitely reach out and we'll try and get your questions answered.